My parents asked me to transfer $6,200 so they could fix the roof. When I refused, my father took my hand, squeezed it hard, and said, "You don't want to know what happens if you disrespect me." My aunt gasped and said, "He did the same thing to me." That's when I finally told the truth. My parents told me they needed $6,200 to repair their roof. I asked for a quote, proof, anything that would explain the number. My father didn't like that. He called me ungrateful. When I said no, he got up, walked over, took my hand, and squeezed it hard. "You don't want to know what happens if you disrespect me," he said. Before I could respond, my Aunt Vi, who was sitting nearby, gasped and said, "He did the same thing to me." And that's when I finally told the truth about everything. This happened just a few months ago, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around how far it all went. For background, I'm Marla, 42, no kids, never married, and I live alone in Ithaca, New York, where I teach writing at a local community college. My relationship with my parents has always been complicated. To the outside world, they're just a regular working-class couple who raised 3 kids in Auburn. Dad worked at the paper mill until it shut down, and Mom did shifts at the laundromat until her health took a turn. But inside our house, it was different. Always had been. Growing up, I learned quickly that compliance was rewarded, and questions were punished. Not just scolded, punished. My father had a way of making you regret opening your mouth. He didn't need to yell. He had a stare that could freeze you mid-sentence, and a grip that could make you feel like your bones were about to snap. It wasn't the kind of abuse you'd see on TV. No broken arms. No black eyes. But the fear lived in your body, quietly and deeply, long after the moment passed. For years I convinced myself it wasn't real abuse. Other people had it worse. I had a roof over my head, didn't I? Clothes, school, even piano lessons for a few years. But now that I look back, those gifts came at a cost. Compliance. Silence. Loyalty. When I got my own place after college, I was only 90 minutes away, but it felt like a different planet. I didn't come home much, and when I did, I left early. I sent money when they asked, sometimes $100 here, $200 there. Always small enough to ignore. I told myself it was easier than arguing. But then came the roof. It started with a call from my mother. She sounded tired, but there was urgency in her voice. "Marla, your father says the roof is leaking. It's gotten into the attic insulation." "Okay. Did you call someone?" "He talked to a guy he knows. Said it'll be $6,200. "Who's the contractor?" "Can I talk to him?" Why do you always need to double-check everything? That was the moment I felt the old dynamic kick in. The need to question, and the fear that questioning would be punished. Still, I pushed back. I asked for the contractor's name, the insurance info, and pictures. Anything. She didn't have answers, and soon my dad got on the phone. His tone was clipped. "So what's it gonna be, Marla? We're not made of money." "I'm not either. I just need some clarity before I send that much. You either trust us or you don't." I didn't say anything. That was enough for him. Ungrateful. "We gave you everything and you won't even help when we need you." He hung up. For a few days, I stewed. It wasn't even about the money, it was about the way they asked. No, the way they demanded. The pressure. The assumption that I owed them. I mentioned it to a friend from high school, Sylvia, who still lives in Auburn and works in real estate. She offered to drive by the house and check it out. She called me later that day. "Marla, there's nothing visibly wrong with the roof. No tarps. No sagging. Nothing. And I know that guy your dad plays poker with, he's no contractor." That was the first time I said it out loud. They're lying to me. I wasn't shocked. Not really. I just didn't know what to do with that information. Fast forward a week to my Aunt Vi's birthday dinner. She's my mom's younger sister and the only member of the family I've ever truly felt safe with. She's sharp, kind, and has never been afraid to go against the grain. She never married, never had kids, and people used to whisper that she was too independent for her own good. I always admired that about her. The family was gathered at her house just outside Syracuse. Everyone was there, my 2 brothers with their wives and kids, some cousins, even a neighbor or two. The energy was off from the start. My parents hadn't spoken to me since the call. My dad kept glancing in my direction like I was a problem he hadn't decided how to solve yet. I tried to play it cool. Made small talk. Helped set the table. But the air was thick with unspoken words. After dinner, as we were having coffee in the living room, my dad stood up and walked over to where I was sitting. He reached out, took my hand, and squeezed it. Not a gesture of affection. It was a message. "You don't want to know what happens if you disrespect me," he said, soft but cold. I pulled my hand away and looked around. Everyone had heard it. Everyone. And then Aunt Vi, who had been quiet until that point, said, "He did the same thing to me." The room went silent. My mom's face turned pale. I turned to Vi. "What do you mean?" She looked at me, then at the rest of the family. "When I was 17, I had a boyfriend your dad didn't like. He told me to end it. I didn't. He cornered me in the kitchen and twisted my arm behind my back until I cried. Told me I was ruining the family." My mother opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but no sound came out. And I couldn't hold it anymore. "I thought I was the only one," I said, barely above a whisper. "He used to do that to me. The hand thing. The wrist thing. The threats. And when I got older, the silent treatment. He'd pretend I didn't exist for days, sometimes weeks." I looked around the room. Some people looked shocked. Others just looked away. My father didn't deny it. He didn't even look ashamed. "You're overreacting. You always were." And that was it. That was his response. There's more to this, and I'll keep sharing if people are interested. But that moment, that one sentence from my aunt, opened a floodgate. And I realized something I should have realized a long time ago: I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. And I wasn't alone. After that night at Aunt Vi's, things didn't go back to normal, and honestly, I didn't want them to. Vi and I sat in her kitchen later that evening after everyone had left. The dishes were done, but she kept drying the same mug over and over like her hands needed something to do. I was still sitting stiffly in the same chair I'd pulled out during dessert, a half-full cup of cold coffee in front of me. "I didn't think he'd do that to you," Vi said quietly, setting the mug down. "I should have guessed. I'm sorry." I shook my head. "You didn't do anything." She gave a soft laugh, one without humor. "That's exactly the problem." That night, I stayed in her guest room. It was the first time in years I didn't wake up with my heart pounding in the middle of the night. There was something calming about that creaky old house of hers, the shelves full of books, the soft ticking of an actual clock. Not a phone screen, not the hum of anxiety. Just stillness. The next morning, I made the mistake of checking my phone. 10 missed calls from my mother. 2 voicemails from my father. One of them was just breathing before he hung up. Then a text. "We need to talk. You embarrassed us in front of the whole family." No mention of what he'd said. No acknowledgement of Vi's revelation. Just wounded pride. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Sylvia again and asked if she could help me with something a little more official. She put me in touch with a local contractor who agreed to go by my parents' house and inspect the roof. It cost me $75, but it felt necessary. He called me later that day. "There's nothing wrong with it. Not even a missing shingle." That confirmed everything I needed to know. The $6,200 was a lie. A fabrication. A tool to pull me back into their control. What surprised me most was how easy it had almost worked. That part gnawed at me. Even after all the years, all the distance, I still flinched at their disapproval. I still wanted to avoid conflict. That, more than anything, was proof that the hold they had on me was real. I didn't respond to their calls or texts for a few weeks. During that time, Vi started coming to Ithaca every Saturday. We'd have brunch at this little spot called Collegetown Bagels, then walk down to the farmer's market by the lake. She told me more about what she'd seen over the years, how my mom changed after marrying Dad, how her relationship with the family deteriorated because she talked back too much, how she suspected things but could never prove them. "You know, your mom was never like that growing up," she said once, while picking through peaches at a produce stand. "She had opinions. She was funny. But after she married your dad, it was like someone dimmed her light. I had a hard time picturing that version of my mother. The woman I knew was quiet, anxious, and quick to redirect any conversation that veered into uncomfortable territory. She didn't make jokes, she made lists. She didn't laugh, she scolded. And she certainly never contradicted my father. I started therapy again. I'd gone in my early 30s, after a bad breakup that left me gutted and confused. But back then, I hadn't had the language to talk about my parents, about what I'd grown up with. I thought my issues were about romantic relationships, about trust. Now I understood it had started much earlier than that. My new therapist, Dr. Kaminsky, was a quiet, patient woman in her 50s who let me talk for long stretches without interruption. In our second session, I found myself saying something I hadn't ever really articulated. I think they taught me that love had to hurt. Or cost something. She nodded slowly. That's a very common realization for adult children of emotionally or physically abusive parents. I told her about the roof, about my dad's threat, about Vi's revelation. About how part of me still felt guilty for not helping, even after everything. That's the training, she said. That guilt is a symptom, not a sign of your goodness. It helped. Not instantly, but it helped. Then, one afternoon in late March, I got another letter from my parents. Not a text. A real letter, in my mother's handwriting. The first line read, "We still don't understand why you would accuse us like that in front of everyone." It went downhill from there. There was no apology. Just defensiveness. Accusations. Wounded pride. A claim that Vi was always jealous, and that I had been brainwashed by her. They ended it with, "We raised you better than this." I put the letter in a folder and added it to a growing file I was keeping, just in case. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. Maybe nothing. But it felt like drawing a boundary just to have it. Over the next few weeks, other relatives began to reach out, some cautiously, some angrily. My cousin Brent called to say he was staying out of it. My brother Neil sent a message that just said, "You should have kept your mouth shut." But one person surprised me, my youngest brother, Calvin. He hadn't said much at the dinner and didn't speak up afterward. But he texted one evening while I was grading papers. "You were right. He did it to me too." I didn't think anyone would believe me. I stared at the screen for a long time before I responded. "I believe you." There was a pause. Then another message. "Thank you for saying it out loud." That one hit me harder than anything. Because that's what it really comes down to, right? For so many of us, those raised in families where silence is survival, just saying it out loud can feel revolutionary. And terrifying. Like you're betraying something sacred, when really, you're just stepping out of a lie. I hadn't seen my parents since that dinner. But the memory of my father's grip, and my aunt's voice cracking as she said, "He did the same thing to me," stayed with me like an echo. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want an apology anymore. I just wanted peace. And for the first time in a long time, I was starting to feel like that was possible. Vi kept visiting, and with every walk through the market or quiet cup of coffee, I felt less like the isolated, anxious woman I'd been before that dinner and more like someone rebuilding herself from pieces she didn't even realize were broken. The surprising part? It wasn't some dramatic transformation. There were no big epiphanies, no glowing moments of self-discovery. It was small things, buying flowers for my kitchen table, leaving my phone off during dinner, sleeping through the night without waking up, panicking over nothing. I didn't fully realize how much my parents had occupied space in my head until they were gone from it. Or, at least, until I stopped letting them dictate my thoughts. But of course, they weren't really gone. A couple of weeks after Calvin's message, I got a call from my old neighbor in Auburn, Mrs. Burkett. She and my mother had always been friendly, and I used to mow her lawn when I was a teenager. She was calling, she said, because she was worried about my mom. Apparently, Mom had started telling people around the neighborhood that I'd cut her off and was letting them starve. That they were too proud to beg, but that they'd fallen on hard times and I had turned my back on the family. "She didn't ask me to call you," Mrs. Burkett added quickly. "But I just thought you should know what she's been saying." I thanked her and hung up. I wasn't surprised. Not really. That was the other part of the training, guilt through performance. My parents weren't just angry. They needed me to look like the bad one. I didn't respond. Instead, I talked about it in therapy. Dr. Kaminsky asked me a question that stuck with me: what would happen if you let them believe what they want? I didn't answer at first. I sat there blinking at her, heart pounding, stomach twisted. And then I realized nothing would happen. I wouldn't die. I wouldn't unravel. I wouldn't even be less of a daughter. I'd just be free. But knowing that and living it are two different things. The idea of being cast as the villain in my own family still stung, even if I knew the version of me they told stories about wasn't real. I was trying to live a quiet life. I had students to teach, papers to grade, deadlines to meet. But their shadow lingered. That's the thing no one tells you about abusive families: it's not just what they did, it's how long they continue to echo in your decisions, in your relationships, in the voice in your head that says you're selfish every time you say no. Around mid-April, I got a message from a cousin I hadn't talked to in years, Nicolette, my mom's brother's daughter. We'd been close as kids, drifted apart after college. She messaged me on Facebook. "Hey. I heard what happened at Aunt Vi's. Just wanted to say, you're brave. And I'm sorry I wasn't around more when we were younger." I think we all knew something was off, but we didn't have the words for it. That one made me cry. It wasn't just the support. It was the validation. The confirmation that it hadn't all lived in my head. She and I started talking more regularly after that. She lived in Albany now, worked in a nonprofit, and had 2 kids. We talked about childhood memories, how tense our holiday dinners always were, how my dad's presence changed the mood of a room, how everyone seemed to look to my mother to keep him calm. It was like she was the ambassador for him, Nicolette said once. Always interpreting. Always smoothing things over. That rang so true it made my teeth hurt. I remembered one Christmas when I was maybe 12. My dad got angry because I'd overcooked the green beans. He didn't yell, he just left the table and didn't come back. My mom had quietly excused herself and found him in the garage. 10 minutes later, he returned as if nothing had happened. Nobody mentioned it again. We never did. That was the pattern. Something would happen, quiet violence, subtle rage, and then it was swept away. Forgotten by everyone except the person it landed on. And now that I was finally speaking about it, the memories were rushing in faster than I could keep up with them. They came uninvited, in the middle of lectures, in grocery aisles, in the quiet of my living room after dinner. One night, I found myself standing in the middle of my kitchen, staring at the clock on the microwave, remembering how Dad used to time my chores. He'd give me 20 minutes to clean the bathroom, and if I took longer, he'd say I was lazy. If I rushed, he'd find something I missed and call me careless. I couldn't win. "You were never meant to win," Dr. Kaminsky said when I told her. "That's the trap of control. You learn to adjust yourself endlessly, but the rules are designed to break you either way." That session ended with me sitting in my car afterward for nearly an hour, just breathing. Just letting the weight of it settle. I was learning now how much of my life I'd built around avoiding conflict. How many choices I'd made based on fear rather than desire. And how often I'd said yes when I meant no, just because no had always felt dangerous. And as all this was happening, my own slow excavation, my parents were busy writing their own version of events. I knew it. I didn't have to hear it firsthand. I knew them well enough to imagine the conversations. "She's ungrateful. She's always been dramatic. That aunt of hers put ideas in her head." But I also knew I couldn't go back. Not even a little. And the strange thing? For all their manipulations, they never tried to apologize. Never once said, "We didn't know." Never even feigned remorse. They just accused, deflected, and blamed. And in their silence, their refusal, their stubborn certainty, I found more clarity than I'd ever expected. That clarity turned into resolve, not rage, not a thirst for vengeance, but a deep need to rewrite the rules of engagement. I didn't want to hurt them. I didn't even want to make them suffer. What I wanted, truly, was to make it undeniable that I was no longer under their thumb. I wanted them to see me as someone they couldn't manipulate. And if I was going to burn the bridge, I wanted to do it with quiet dignity, and gasoline that smelled like consequence. I started small. The first step was closing off access. I got a new phone number. Changed my email. Not out of fear, out of necessity. I didn't want them reaching me unless I invited them to. And for the first time in my life, I began inviting myself to take up space. I submitted a personal essay to a regional magazine, one that covered upstate New York life and often ran first-person pieces about family, community, healing. I changed names. I changed the town. But I didn't change the facts. The story was raw and real and called What I Learned About Love After I Stopped Being Afraid of My Father. They published it. The piece caught attention, especially among educators and women in social work. People emailed me to say they'd printed it out, read it with highlighters. One woman said she gave it to her daughter and said, "Now you understand why I left my family." Then a local radio show reached out. They'd read the piece and wanted to interview me. At first, I said no. But Vi encouraged me to do it. "You're not doing it to them," she said. "You're doing it for everyone like us." So I did the interview. I used my real name. I didn't mention theirs, but I didn't need to. Anyone in Auburn who listened would know exactly who I meant. When the segment aired, I braced myself. I didn't check my messages. I didn't look at social media. I sat with Vi that night, eating vegetable soup and watching reruns of old detective shows. 3 days later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized my father's handwriting. It was a single page. "You've shamed this family. You're no longer welcome here. You want independence? You got it." I folded the letter slowly and smiled. Because that was exactly what I wanted. But I wasn't done. A month later, I filed for a small claims case in the Cayuga County Court. Not to sue them for damages, but to formally dispute a verbal loan they had previously claimed I'd agreed to during tax season. See, I'd found out through Sylvia that they were trying to deduct a fictional loan repayment on their taxes, money I had supposedly paid them back for help with early education and housing support. It was, obviously, a lie. I filed documentation, my own financial records, statements from a CPA who'd helped me manage my expenses for years, even Sylvia's notarized statement that they'd spoken about creating paper debt to fudge finances. The judge dismissed their claim before it could even hit a courtroom. But it was now a matter of public record that they had attempted to commit tax fraud, using me as their scapegoat. They were investigated. Briefly, but thoroughly enough that the IRS issued a warning. I never heard from them again after that. But I heard from plenty of others. My brother Calvin moved to Rochester, closer to my side of the state. He started therapy and told me over coffee that he'd finally told his girlfriend everything, things he hadn't even admitted to himself until I started speaking out. Nicolette invited me to speak to a group of social workers at her nonprofit about trauma, silence, and reclaiming personal truth. It was the first time I stood in front of strangers and said out loud, I was emotionally abused by my family. But I'm okay now. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I spoke like someone who had found her footing. And Aunt Vi, God bless her, kept showing up every Saturday, bringing a new book or a plant or a slice of pie she'd picked up from the co-op. She told me, again and again, this isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. She was right. The final nail in the coffin wasn't dramatic. No one screamed. No one stormed out of a courtroom. What happened was quieter and so much more powerful. My parents became irrelevant. They lost their power when I stopped defending myself. When I stopped playing the part of the obedient daughter, just hoping one day they'd soften. When I let them sit in their anger and disappointment without trying to fix it. That was my revenge. No screaming. No slamming doors. Just me, living my life, telling the truth, and refusing to carry the shame that didn't belong to me. They had tried to keep me small. And now they had to watch, from a distance, as I grew into something they couldn't reach. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was free.